Nola and Vila, twin alien sisters, had always been inseparable both in their bond and in their devotion to the colony they served. Their connection to each other was as strong as their loyalty to their commander and the mission of their people. So when the colony's leader called them in for a special assignment, the sisters accepted without hesitation, despite the vague and unsettling nature of the orders. Their mission was simple but cryptic: to travel to Earth and locate a specific point, a location pinpointed by a GPS device the commander provided. Once there, they were to wait, but they were given no further instructions or explanation. Both sisters found it strange, but they trusted their leader implicitly and prepared for the journey without asking questions. As they set off, the sisters couldn't shake the feeling of apprehension creeping into their thoughts. Earth was known to be unpredictable, especially at night, and the commander's lack of details added to their uncertainty. However, their duty to the colony outweighed any fears. Steeling themselves, Nola and Vila climbed aboard their spacecraft and began their descent, mentally preparing for whatever awaited them. They landed on Earth as the sun dipped low, casting a dim glow over the landscape. The sky was streaked with shades of amber and purple, and the vast expanse of unfamiliar terrain stretched out before them. A driver, a man from their colony, who had been stationed on Earth for a long-term assignment, was waiting to greet them. With quiet efficiency, he helped them into the vehicle, giving them only the briefest of glances, as though he knew not to ask questions about their purpose. The drive was silent, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the occasional beep from the GPS device guiding them. Vila, feeling the unease growing stronger, whispered to Nola, voicing her fear that Earth, especially in the dark hours, held dangers they couldn't anticipate. Nola gave her a reassuring squeeze, even though she, too, was feeling the gnawing anxiety. The driver, noticing their discomfort, turned to them briefly and assured them there was no need to worry. "I'm here to make sure you have everything you need," he said, his voice steady and calm. Still, the sisters couldn't shake their unease as they neared their destination, which the GPS confirmed was a vast, seemingly endless body of water. The car came to a halt at the shoreline. The driver turned in his seat and explained that they needed to enter the water and continue to the designated point marked on the GPS device. Nola and Vila exchanged a look, apprehension in their eyes. They asked the driver to step out of the car while they prepared, and he obliged, waiting patiently outside. As soon as he turned away, the sisters retrieved the swimsuits they had packed, quickly changing into them. Both were silent, lost in their thoughts. Their instincts were screaming that something was amiss, yet they pushed their fear aside, committed to carrying out their orders. Nola gripped the GPS device tightly, and with a shared look of resolve, they stepped out of the vehicle and began their journey into the water. As they waded into the sea, the water stayed surprisingly shallow. Despite moving further from the shore, the water barely rose above their knees, giving them the eerie sensation that they were walking on an endless, shallow plateau. After several minutes, the GPS device emitted a loud beep, signaling they had reached the designated point. Remembering their instructions, they stopped, holding their breath and scanning the dark horizon. They waited, straining their ears for any sound or signal that might reveal the purpose of their mission. But instead of a signal, they felt the sand shifting beneath their feet. The water began pulling them down, almost as if the sea itself were swallowing them whole. Panic seized both of them, and they started to struggle, crying out for help as the ground beneath them seemed to vanish. Their driver, who had been standing at the shore, heard their desperate screams and sprinted toward the water, his face filled with concern. But as he reached the edge, a gunshot rang out, echoing across the shoreline. The driver stumbled, his body collapsing lifelessly onto the sand. Vila watched in horror, her breath caught in her throat, as he lay still. Their only contact on Earth had been silenced. The situation grew direr by the second. Both sisters were sinking deeper, the water lapping at their chests as they clawed at the sand, trying to find solid ground. It was then that a voice, strong and steady, broke through the chaos. A lifeguard, tall and muscular, sprinted toward them, his eyes locked on their flailing forms. In a few powerful strides, he reached them, grasping Nola and Vila with his strong arms and pulling them free of the treacherous sand. When they finally reached the shore, gasping for air, the lifeguard knelt beside them, concern etched on his face. "Are you both all right?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine worry. Nola, still catching her breath, nodded, though she was shaking. Vila glanced back at the beach, searching for any trace of the driver or the vehicle, but there was nothing. The lifeguard noticed her bewildered look and furrowed his brow. "What were you doing out there?" he asked, glancing over at the stretch of water where they had almost drowned. "This is the most dangerous part of the beach, known for its shifting sands and unpredictable currents. People vanish out there." A shiver ran down Nola's spine. She and Vila exchanged glances, the realization dawning on them. This was no ordinary mission. Had their commander known? Had he sent them here to die? Vila's voice wavered as she turned back to the lifeguard. "Did you see anyone else out here, a driver or a car?" The lifeguard shook his head. "No, I was on duty nearby and heard you screaming, so I ran over. There's been no one else around." His gaze lingered on them, his brow furrowed as he tried to understand how they had ended up in such a dangerous part of the beach. Nola and Vila, still breathless, exchanged worried glances. Vila tried to calm her racing heart as the weight of their situation became clearer. "Are you sure?" she asked, almost pleading. "He was right there. We saw him fall. He was the one who brought us here, told us where to go." Rick, the lifeguard, shook his head once more, his expression softening. "There was no car here, no other person. It's just you two." He looked around the deserted beach. The first hints of dawn were casting a faint glow over the sand, but otherwise, the beach was silent and still, adding to the eerie feeling that washed over the sisters. "Where are you from?" Rick asked, his voice gentle but curious. "And what brought you to a place like this in the middle of the night?" Nola hesitated. She and Vila had never planned to reveal their origins to a human. The colony's strict rules had taught them that their mission was one of discretion. The people of Earth were not to know about alien civilizations, but with every glance back toward the sea and the empty shore, they felt more certain that they had been betrayed by their own people. They were stranded and alone, with no hope of rescue. Looking into Rick's eyes, Nola felt a strange instinct to trust him, something she couldn't quite explain. We came from a distant place, a colony far from here." Nola's voice was quiet, but the words carried an intense vulnerability that caught Rick off guard. "Our mission was simple: just follow the signal. And wait, we didn't know it would lead us to that." She gestured back toward the shifting sands where they had nearly perished. Rick nodded slowly, piecing together what little information he had. His expression shifted from curiosity to sympathy. "So, you're not from here? And someone sent you to this place? For no reason at all?" Vila's eyes, usually sharp and unyielding, softened as she answered. "It wasn't supposed to be dangerous," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But it feels like they wanted us to disappear. And now we're stranded here, without a way to get back." Rick listened, his face clouded with concern as the full weight of their words sank in. He realized that these women weren't just travelers or tourists. They were lost, abandoned in a world they barely understood. Taking a deep breath, Rick reached out, his hand warm as he clasped Vila's shoulder. "Look, I don't know much about where you came from, but I do know what it feels like to be left on your own. I've got an extra room in my place, some food, whatever you need. You're safe here." The sisters glanced at each other, their shared expression conveying a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They had been trained to survive harsh conditions, to be resourceful, but the truth was they had never anticipated something like this: being cut off from everything they knew and thrust into a foreign world with no guidance. After a long pause, Nola nodded, a faint glimmer of trust flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "We don't know what we'll do next, but thank you." Rick offered them a warm smile, and with a reassuring nod, he gestured toward his hut further up the beach. As they walked back, he couldn't help but steal glances at the sisters. They moved gracefully, as if the gravity here barely affected them, but there was a sadness in their eyes that tugged at his heart. When they reached the hut, he opened the door and motioned for them to enter. Inside, it was simple but cozy, with a small kitchen, a couple of chairs, and a couch that doubled as a bed. Vila and Nola looked around, clearly unused to such humble surroundings, yet they seemed to relax as they took it in. Rick moved to the small kitchenette and poured them each a cup of tea. "It's not much," he said, setting the mugs down in front of them. "But I figure after what you just went through, a little warmth might help." The sisters took the cups gratefully, their hands warming as they held them. Vila looked up at Rick, her voice soft. "Why are you helping us? You don't know who we are." Rick shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "I guess because, well, I don't know. I just felt like I needed to. I've seen people get lost out here, and I've seen people who needed a little help. But with you two it's different. You're clearly going through something big, and maybe I don't understand it, but I can still be here." The kindness in his words made something inside the sisters shift. For so long, they had been taught to rely only on each other and on the rules of the colony. But this man, who knew nothing of them, had extended his hand without question. The hours passed slowly as they talked, sharing fragments of their lives without revealing too much. Rick listened intently, never pressing them for details, only nodding and offering his thoughts when it seemed right. The trust between them grew with each passing moment, and for the first time since they'd landed on Earth, Nola and Vila felt a small sense of peace. As the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, Rick rose from his seat, stretching as he prepared for the new day. He glanced over at Nola and Vila, his gaze soft. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I'm just down the beach most days, so if you need anything, I'll be around." The sisters nodded, their expressions showing a quiet gratitude they couldn't put into words. They had been trained for countless scenarios, but this learning to trust a stranger, learning to live as if they might never return to their home, was something they had never anticipated. Over the following days, Rick introduced them to the simple routines of his life. He showed them how to gather food, how to navigate the beaches safely, and even how to swim in the less dangerous parts of the water. They spent long afternoons on the shore, watching the waves and talking about everything from the stars to the smallest details of earthly life. Vila's laugh, once rare and careful, became more frequent, and Nola's guarded demeanor softened in the presence of Rick's steady kindness. In time, Nola and Vila shared more about their home. Rick listened, entranced by their stories of distant planets and advanced technologies, of a life so different from anything he had known. They told him of the colony's strict rules and the rigid hierarchies that defined their society. And Rick, in turn, told them of his own struggles, his dreams, and the family he'd lost years ago. As the days turned into weeks, Nola and Vila realized that their hearts had started to anchor themselves to this new life. And as they spent more time with Rick, a new feeling began to grow between them. They found themselves drawn to him, captivated by the warmth in his eyes, the steadiness of his presence, and the gentle way he seemed to understand them without ever needing to ask. One evening, as they sat by the fire Rick had built outside his hut, Nola reached over, her hand lightly brushing Rick's. She met his gaze, a question lingering in her eyes. Vila, sensing the moment, gave her sister an encouraging smile. Rick, surprised but not hesitant, took her hand and held it gently. A warmth spread between them, as if the fire itself had sparked a connection that reached deeper than words. Nola leaned in, her lips brushing his in a soft, tentative kiss, followed by Vila, who echoed her sister's silent promise. Rick held them both, feeling a rush of emotions that surprised him as much as it comforted him. Here, on this secluded stretch of earth, they had found something none of them had expected, a sense of belonging, of family. As the night deepened, they stayed by the fire, sharing quiet stories, laughter, and stolen glances. Though they didn't know what the future held, Nola, Vila, and Rick had found something precious in each other in new home, forged not by duty or fate, but by the simplest and most unexpected of connections. And as the stars glittered overhead, the three of them sat together, knowing that no matter where their journey led, they would face it together, bound by trust, loyalty, and a love that transcended the stars.